You think you can see it. You believe you've learned to recognize the signs. Someone who has done the work, someone who has faced their own darkness, wrestled with their shadow, and emerged whole. You look for the signals you've been taught to trust. They speak the language of therapy, of mindfulness, of spiritual growth. They name drop psychological concepts with an easy fluency. They project an aura of calm, a curated wisdom that is both reassuring and impressive. You see this performance and you label it integrated. You believe you found someone safe, someone evolved. But what if the entire framework is a lie? What if the very signs you seek are not signals of depth, but sophisticated advertisements for an empty product? What if the performance of consciousness is the most effective way to avoid the terrifying reality of the work itself? The real markers, the ones that cannot be faked, are not just counterintuitive. They are unsettling. They are often invisible to the untrained eye. For decades, the psychologist Carl Jung immersed himself in the minds of those who had truly completed this journey. He wasn't interested in their theories about themselves. He watched them. He documented the subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in their being. What he found dismantles every popular notion of what psychological transformation looks like. The truly integrated individuals didn't look like spiritual gurus or talk like psychology professors. They didn't wear their work as a badge of honor. In fact, Jung discovered a chilling inversion. The relentless performance of having done the work was the most reliable indicator that the work had never even begun. Genuine integration leaves traces. It carves specific, undeniable patterns into a person's way of being in the world. These markers are not conscious choices. They are the emergent properties of a psyche that has been fundamentally rewired. They cannot be performed because they are not actions. They are consequences. Learning to see these markers allowed Jung to distinguish, often within a single quiet conversation, between the person who was merely performing a story of transformation and the person who had actually lived it. He could separate the actor from the initiate. Today, we will explore the 7 markers Jung identified, the 7 subtle, often uncomfortable proofs that someone has genuinely descended into their own hell and returned with their humanity intact. We will examine why the obvious signs are almost always a trap. We will learn to distinguish the noise of performance from the quiet signal of integration. And this is not an academic exercise. This may be the most critical perceptual skill you ever develop. It is the filter through which you must choose who earns the right to stand close to you. Jung's investigation began with a disturbing paradox. He was surrounded by patients who were experts in the theory of their own brokenness. They had spent years in analysis. They had read every book. They could map their own shadow with terrifying intellectual precision. They spoke the language of integration, of wholeness, of the coniunctio oppositorum, with an eloquence that could move you to tears. But when Jung looked closer, beneath the beautiful language, he found the shadow running rampant. It was completely unintegrated. It was still projected onto their wives, their bosses, their political enemies. It was still the unseen puppeteer of their behavior, pulling the same old strings, creating the same old destructive patterns. They had become brilliant lecturers on a subject they had never truly experienced. They had learned to talk about the descent without ever taking a single step into the abyss. This was not a conscious deception. That's the frightening part. They believed their own performance. They had convinced themselves that intellectual understanding was the same as integration, that the ability to name their demons was the same as having faced them, that talking about their wounds was the same as healing them. But Jung saw that the map is not the territory. The theory of the shadow and the lived experience of it were two entirely different worlds, and they produced entirely different kinds of people. So he began to document the changes. He contrasted the performers with the integrated, and he found them. 7 markers. 7 consistent, unfakeable signatures of a psyche that had truly faced its own darkness. They are not what you expect. They are not what you have been told. They are quieter, stranger, and infinitely more real. The first marker Jung saw was a comfortable silence about the process. The people who had genuinely integrated their shadow almost never spoke about it, not unless they were directly and carefully asked. They weren't broadcasting their psychological journey on every available channel. They weren't trying to position themselves as evolved or awakened. They weren't using the specialized language of psychology or spirituality to signal their superior consciousness to others. They were just living. They moved with an unforced ease, a quiet self-possession that comes from having absolutely nothing to prove. This is profoundly counterintuitive. We assume that someone who has discovered a deep truth would be eager to share it. We expect them to become teachers, guides, proselytizers for the path they have walked. But Jung found the precise opposite. The truly integrated individual wasn't compelled to advertise their inner state because the work had taught them that the journey is radically personal. My darkness is not your darkness. The specific monsters I found in my labyrinth are not the ones you will find in yours. The wisdom gained from that private battle is not a universal truth to be packaged and sold. It is personal psychological material that informs how they live, but it is not content for public consumption. It is the soil, not the flower, that is put on display. Contrast this with the performer. The person who has only intellectualized the shadow cannot stop talking about it. They mention their therapist in casual conversation. They frame every mundane conflict as a shadow projection. They use clinical terminology to diagnose their friends, their family, and the barista who got their order wrong. They subtly, or not so utterly, position themselves as the most aware person in any room. This constant broadcasting is not a sign of integration. It is a sign of a deep, unmet need. They are still seeking external validation for a supposedly internal process. They need others to see them as conscious because, deep down, they are not secure in it themselves. Their awareness is a costume, and they are terrified you might see the insecure person underneath. The way to use this marker is to recalibrate your attention. You must learn to listen to the silence. Pay attention to what people don't say. When you meet someone who possesses a palpable psychological depth, who is clearly comfortable in complex, emotionally charged territory, but who never advertises it, you may have found someone real. When they can go deep with you, if you are the one who initiates the descent, but they feel no compulsion to constantly signal their capacity for depth, that is the quiet hum of integration. But when you meet someone whose conversation is littered with the jargon of growth, therapy, and awareness, be cautious. It suggests they are still trying to convince themselves. They are performing consciousness to avoid the terror of completing the work they claim to have already done. The second marker was what Jung called a relaxed relationship to their own darkness. A person who has truly integrated their shadow can acknowledge their own capacity for evil without flinching. They can look you in the eye and admit their potential for cruelty, for manipulation, for unbridled selfishness, for rage. They can do this without the immediate need for defensiveness or shame. Why? Because they have already been there. They have faced those parts of themselves in the darkness. They have accepted them as part of their human inheritance, and they have integrated them into a larger, more complete personality. So talking about it doesn't precipitate a crisis. It's just a statement of fact. They can say, yes, I'm capable of that, when confronted with their own darkest impulses, and they don't need to immediately add a but. They don't need to qualify it, to excuse it, to prove that they are really a good person despite it. This creates a specific quality of honesty that is deeply unsettling to most people. It feels dangerous. Someone who has integrated their shadow can acknowledge a mean-spirited thought, a selfish impulse, a flash of cruel desire, and just let it be there. They don't spiral into self-loathing. They don't rush to perform an act of penance to prove they aren't like that. They know they contain darkness. They stopped pretending otherwise a long time ago. And that acceptance creates a profound psychological ease around their own capacity for harm. It is the peace that comes after a long and terrible war. The person who has not integrated their shadow cannot do this. They're still desperately clinging to an idealized, and therefore false, self-image. When their darkness is exposed, even in a small way, they panic. It feels like an existential threat. They will immediately become defensive. They will explain away their actions, justify their motives, and work tirelessly to prove that they are not really selfish, or cruel, or manipulative. That was a one-time thing. It was a misunderstanding. You are the one who is misinterpreting them. This frantic defensiveness reveals the truth. They have not accepted their shadow. They are still trying to maintain the illusion of a pristine self, a self that requires them to deny or explain away their darkness, rather than own it. To use this marker, you must observe how people respond when their shadow becomes visible. The next time you see someone act in a way that is clearly selfish, or subtly manipulative, or unnecessarily cruel, watch what happens next. Do they acknowledge it with a simple, unnerving ease? Yes, that was a manipulative thing to say. Or, I was being selfish there. Full stop. No qualifications? Or do they immediately launch into a flurry of defense, explanation, and justification? The ease of acknowledgement reveals integration. The rush to defend reveals that the denial is still in charge. The third marker Jung documented is a complete absence of spiritual bypassing. People who have genuinely faced their darkness do not use spiritual concepts to avoid the raw, messy, painful realities of human psychology. They don't tell a grieving friend that everything happens for a reason. They don't dismiss righteous anger about a profound injustice by claiming it was all meant to be. They don't use the concept of forgiveness as a tool to bypass their own legitimate rage at a violation. They have learned to hold the terrifying complexity of reality. They can be spiritual and angry. They can be evolved and grieving. They can be conscious and bitter about a specific harm. They don't need to reduce the mess of life to a clean, simple, spiritual formula. Jung found that real shadow integration makes people less prone to spiritual platitudes, not more. Why? Because they have actually been to the places those platitudes are designed to help you avoid. They have descended into actual darkness. They have felt their own rage, their own grief, their own hatred, their own despair, in their full, terrifying, unadulterated intensity. They have allowed those experiences to move through them, to change them, to become part of them. They have integrated the darkness, not transcended it. So when they see someone else in pain, they cannot bring themselves to offer an easy spiritual concept. They know from their own brutal experience that darkness requires descent, not a premature and fraudulent transcendence. They know that some things should not be explained away. They should be felt. The performer, in contrast, uses spiritual bypassing as their primary tool. It is their shield and their sword. Every difficult emotion, in themselves and in others, gets immediately redirected into a spiritual narrative. Every shadow impulse is explained away with the language of consciousness. They will try to turn your rage into a lesson. They will reframe your grief as an opportunity for spiritual growth. They do this because they cannot tolerate the raw, unprocessed intensity of the shadow. Its presence in you reminds them of the unprocessed darkness in themselves, the darkness they are working so hard to avoid, so they have to neutralize it. They have to coat it in a thick layer of spiritual saccharin to make it palatable. The way to use this marker is to listen. Listen for how people respond to suffering, their own and that of others. Do they sit with it? Do they allow it to be what it is in all its intensity and horror, without rushing to make it meaningful or beautiful? Can they just be present with the pain, without needing to fix it or reframe it? That is the mark of integration. Or do they immediately spiritualize it? Do they reach for a platitude, a concept, a lesson? Do they try to make the suffering go away by explaining it? The ability to let suffering be suffering, without rushing to make it a story of growth, reveals genuine shadow integration. The need to immediately reframe pain as a spiritual lesson reveals a deep fear of the darkness itself. The fourth marker is what Jung called strategic self-disclosure. People who have truly integrated their shadow become incredibly selective about what they reveal about themselves and to whom. This is not about being secretive or dishonest. It is about recognizing a dangerous truth. Psychological depth is a form of vulnerability, and in a world full of people who are not equipped to handle that depth, vulnerability is a liability. So the integrated person shares their inner world incrementally. They conduct small tests. They will reveal a small, slightly uncomfortable truth about themselves and watch how the other person responds. Can you receive this small piece of my shadow without judging it? Without trying to fix it? Without using it against me later? Without becoming overwhelmed by it? This selectivity creates a particular kind of relationship. Intimacy is built slowly, carefully, brick by brick. Trust is not given freely. It is earned through a consistent, demonstrated capacity to hold complexity. The integrated person reveals deeper and deeper layers of themselves only as the other person proves through their actions that they can handle the previous layers without betraying them or misusing them. This process creates relationships of profound and unshakable depth, but only with the few people who've earned that level of access. It is a world away from the instant, superficial vulnerability that is so often mistaken for real intimacy. People who have not integrated their shadow tend to operate at the extremes of this spectrum. They either overshare indiscriminately or they never share anything real at all. The oversharers are the ones who will dump their entire psychological history, their traumas, their anxieties, their darkest secrets onto anyone who will listen, often within minutes of meeting them. They are not building intimacy. They are seeking a reaction. They are looking for validation, for a rescuer, for an audience for their drama. They treat their vulnerability as a performance piece. The non-sharers, on the other hand, maintain such rigid, impenetrable defenses that no one ever gets a glimpse of their actual self. They are a fortress without a door. Both of these patterns reveal a profound lack of integration. The first shows a complete absence of boundaries around their own vulnerability. The second shows boundaries that are so rigid that no real intimacy is ever possible. To use this marker, you must observe how people manage the currency of intimacy. Do they reveal themselves to you gradually in a way that feels paced and earned, based on your demonstrated ability to receive them? Or do they either dump everything on you at once or maintain such a polished, impenetrable surface that you never feel like you have met the real person? Gradual, strategic, earned disclosure is the hallmark of integration. The extremes of oversharing or extreme withholding are the signs of a psyche that has not yet learned how to be both safe and seen. The fifth marker Jung identified as a comfort with moral complexity. The person who has faced their own darkness understands, in their bones, that the world is not a simple morality play. Most situations are not cleanly good or bad. People rarely fit into the neat, satisfying categories of hero and villain, victim and perpetrator. They understand that someone can be both wounded and wounding, hurt and harmful, traumatized and toxic. The integrated person can hold these contradictions without needing to resolve them into a simple, digestible narrative. This ability makes them simultaneously more compassionate and more boundaried. They are more compassionate because they understand that most people's darkness comes from somewhere. It is usually born from their own unintegrated wounds, their own unexamined pain. They can see the hurt child behind the monstrous adult. But, and this is the crucial part, they are also more boundaried. They know that understanding the source of someone's wounds does not obligate them to tolerate being harmed by that person. They can see the whole complex picture, the wounds and the wounding, the pain and the poison. And they can make their decisions based on that full picture, rather than collapsing into either pure, enabling compassion or pure, dehumanizing condemnation. They can say, I see your pain, and I will not allow you to use it as a weapon against me. People who have not integrated their shadow cannot tolerate this level of complexity. They need simple moral narratives. They need to sort the world into clean boxes. Someone is either good or bad, a victim or an abuser, deserving of our compassion or deserving of our rejection. They cannot hold the unsettling truth that people are often both, that the wounded often go on to wound others, that victims can sometimes become perpetrators, that understanding someone's pain does not in any way make their harmful behavior acceptable. This need for simple categories forces them into one of two equally unhelpful positions. Either they become sentimental enablers who excuse harmful behavior because they can see the wound behind it, or they become rigid moralists who condemn anyone who shows a flicker of darkness. To use this marker, you must pay attention to how people talk about others, especially those in conflict. Do they acknowledge complexity? Can they hold the idea that someone is both hurt and harmful at the same time? Or do they need to categorize people into simple moralistic boxes? Do they need to have a good guy and a bad guy in every story? The ability to hold moral complexity, to see the humanity in the perpetrator and the capacity for harm in the victim without collapsing into either pure compassion or pure judgment, is a deep and reliable sign of shadow integration. The sixth marker was what Jung called non-reactive boundaries. People who have integrated their shadow can set and maintain boundaries without the need for anger, justification, or guilt. They don't need to write a 10-page essay explaining why they are saying no. They don't need to work themselves into a state of righteous anger in order to enforce their limits. They don't feel a lingering sense of guilt for prioritizing their own needs or their own peace. They just calmly, clearly, and firmly state their boundary and then maintain it, regardless of the other person's response. Their no is a complete sentence. This is possible because the process of shadow integration includes integrating their own capacity for what others might label as selfishness or cruelty. They have made peace with the fact that prioritizing themselves will sometimes mean disappointing others. They have accepted that protecting their own energy and sanity will sometimes mean being cast as the bad guy in someone else's story. They understand that a boundary, by its very definition, requires a willingness to be seen as cold or uncaring or selfish by the people who were previously benefiting from the absence of that boundary. They have faced those parts of themselves and made peace with them. They are no longer afraid of being called selfish. The unintegrated person, by contrast, either has no boundaries at all or needs a tremendous amount of drama to create and maintain them. The no boundaries group cannot tolerate the discomfort of being seen as selfish. They are so desperate for approval, so terrified of being disliked, that they will sacrifice their own well-being to please others. The drama boundaries group can only say no when they have been pushed to their absolute limit. They need to build up a head of steam, a righteous fury that is powerful enough to overcome their deep-seated guilt about self-prioritization. They need to make the other person bad in order to justify their own no. Both of these patterns reveal an unintegrated shadow. They show a psyche that has not yet accepted the necessity and the rightness of choosing oneself, even if it means disappointing others. The practical application of this marker is to observe. How do people set boundaries? Is it a calm, clear statement of fact? Do they state their limit without over-explaining, without apologizing, without getting angry? Or do they either have no boundaries at all, collapsing at the first sign of someone else's displeasure? Or do they need to work themselves into an emotional state, a storm of drama and anger, in order to enforce their limits? Calm, guilt-free, non-reactive boundaries are a sign of deep integration. The absence of boundaries, or the need for dramatic enforcement, reveals a lack of it. The seventh and final marker Jung documented was a quality he called humble certainty. The people who had done the deep work of facing their darkness had developed a strong, solid internal sense of who they were, what they valued, and what was true for them. This was not an arrogant certainty. It was a quiet, grounded knowing that came from deep self-acquaintance. But this certainty was always paired with a profound humility about what they didn't know. They were clear and certain about their own personal truth, while simultaneously acknowledging that other people might have completely different and equally valid truths. They didn't need everyone to agree with them. They felt no compulsion to convert others to their perspective. They could simply live their own truth while allowing others the space to live theirs. This created a specific combination that is incredibly rare. Strong boundaries and genuine openness existing at the same time. They had strong boundaries around their own truth, their own values, their own path. But they had a genuine openness to the idea that other people's paths might be completely different and no less valid. They could be completely certain about themselves, while remaining completely uncertain about any kind of universal one-size-fits-all truth. They could be fully committed to their own path, while fully respecting the paths of others. The unintegrated person tends to exist at one of the two extremes. They are either completely uncertain about everything, or they are rigidly, arrogantly certain. The uncertain ones have no solid core, no real sense of self. They are chameleons, adopting whatever truth seems most convenient or most likely to win them approval in any given moment. They are a weather vane, spinning in the wind of other people's opinions. The rigidly certain ones are the opposite. They believe that their truth is the truth. They're on a constant mission to convert everyone else to their perspective. They need the external validation of others agreeing with them to feel secure in their own beliefs. Both of these patterns reveal a lack of integration. The first reveals a person with no solid self. The second reveals a person with a brittle, defended self, a self that needs constant external confirmation to maintain its own fragile structure. To use this marker, you must observe how people hold their beliefs. Are they certain about their own truth while being completely relaxed about yours being different? Can they state their beliefs clearly and confidently without needing you to agree? Or are they either constantly shifting their ground to accommodate you, or rigidly insisting that you must see the world their way? This quality of humble certainty of a strong core combined with a genuine openness is perhaps the most refined and most reliable marker of true shadow integration. So why does this matter? Why go to all this trouble to learn to spot these subtle, difficult markers? Jung's answer was brutally pragmatic. It's about your own psychological survival. A person who has not integrated their shadow, no matter how conscious they appear, no matter how beautifully they perform the language of growth, will eventually project that unowned darkness onto you. They will accuse you of the very sins they have refused to face in themselves. They will unconsciously create relational dynamics that force you to carry the parts of their psyche they cannot bear. And you will not see it coming. Not if you're looking at the wrong signs. The person who talks constantly about their shadow work, but becomes instantly defensive when their own darkness is pointed out, they will eventually make you responsible for their unintegrated anger. The person who uses spiritual bypassing to avoid their own pain, they will expect you to transcend your legitimate suffering while they continue to avoid their own. The person who overshares their vulnerability without any sense of strategic disclosure, They will eventually use your vulnerability against you because they have no real understanding of how to hold another person's depth without misusing it for their own needs. But the person who has done the work, the one who is quiet about their process, relaxed with their darkness, free from spiritual bypassing, strategic with their disclosures, comfortable with complexity, non-reactive in their boundaries, and humbly certain in their truth, that person is safe. They can be in a relationship with you without projecting their unintegrated material onto you. They can see your darkness without needing you to carry theirs. They can hold the full, messy, contradictory complexity of who you are without needing to collapse you into a simple story that makes them more comfortable. This is not about judging people. It is about choosing them. It is about understanding that who you choose to have proximity to your life is a choice between psychological safety and a very comfortable illusion. You can surround yourself with the performers, and you will live in a world of beautiful, fragile surfaces where everyone is talking about depth while desperately avoiding it. Or you can learn to see the real markers, and you can find the rare others who have done the work. The choice, as always, is yours.